My boy, Zachary Quinto.
Yes. Give us the gaze.
And this other guy, I never bothered to learn his name.
Be home around 4. He loves it. First of all,
When is Zachary Quinto coming back to American Horror Story? That will always be my question.
Maybe never.
I wonder if Asylum got too dark for him. He was like, okay, I'm good.
At this point, with you, I'm bulletproof. I'm trying here. I'm trying.
I have to remember, it's the house.
It's the house.
The house is making these people crazy.
Yep.
Spectacular. Carve a goddamn pumpkin. Go get a goddamn outfit and man up. Did you get the apples?
I have never bobbed for apples, I don't think.
I have. It's extremely difficult.
Oh, he's being drowned in
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Ooh, no.
It's Halloween. I do the full 7 days.
I do the full 7 days. I've never known anyone to celebrate Halloween like that.
Gays in New York in general, but especially the gays, Halloween is a month-long holiday. The entire month of October is Halloween.
Jeepers.
I didn't do anything.
I think I'm just upset about how perpetually exhausted I am in comparison to the rest of the world, I guess. Get it. Kick that pumpkin.
I'm done talking. I have a patient. I love Halloween. So does Patrick, because the bars are just awash in twinks.
I'm upset that these two are dead and have been dead together for several years, can't leave each other, and they still haven't worked on the relationship.
They all go through character development. Some of them do get over their issues, but these two...
Crafting brings out his inner George and Martha.
Trick or treat.
Have we talked about the fact that I met her?
No.
Eddie, I want to be a pretty girl.
Yeah.
Halloween.
I met her on a photo shoot. I designed a show, an off-Broadway show that she was the lead in, so she was in the art.
Wow.
So for the photo shoot, I got to go, and it was her and two other actors, and she was hilarious, and she kept giving the other actors bunny ears, like, during the shoot. It was great.
He likes you. I can tell. He thinks you're a pretty girl.
Really? I didn't scare you?
I said no.
I bet I can.
Also, no. To do a Ouija board in this place?
Yeah.
I don't believe in that shit.
Charles is going to answer all your questions. The boyfriend wanted revenge, so he kidnapped Charles and Nora's baby.
I wonder if, just like in general though, if like just baby napping.
Horror that is based around the taking of a child or the taking of a baby. Even The Witch starts, that's the inciting incident, is the child is stolen.
I think a baby specifically, I mean, it's horrible when any child at any age is taken and harmed, but like a baby.
What did I say, Charles?
Madam, there's no need for you to see this.
Did you see her in Boston?
Vivian, no.
There was nothing convincing about that. Vivian.
No. Why would you think that?
She won't be calling back.
She's dead. I buried her. And then I built you a gazebo. Love you.
It didn't even slow down. Like, they're just like, boop, goodbye.
No, like, nothing. No reaction.
You always had the most beautiful hands.
Still trying to figure out why she's the only ghost who can transform her age. You know, it's like, is it because, I don't know. I'm just trying to think, like, what's different about her than everybody else who's died in that house? And the only thing I can think of is, like, how, like, the motive as to why she died. Like, it wasn't the house who killed her. It was Constance's own rage and insecurity.
This is my fault.
Oh my god, the skeleton's fucking in the yard.
Were those?
Yes.
Yeah, I was like, were those skeletons
I
fucking?
think the implication is that Zachary Quinto did that on his way out. It is actually a plot point that Tate has a big dick.
Why do I love a well-endowed, like, emotionally crippled man?
Are you gay?
No.
Imagine being a parent with a child who's trick-or-treating in this neighborhood. Like, that house has got to be infamous at this point.
Grossness.
Being creepy for shits and giggles.
All is coming from inside the house. What a weird place to set a boundary.
Sorry, Zachary Quinto's eyebrows.
Infant kidnapping is something we should talk about.
I think I want to talk a little bit about trick-or-treating.
Welcome to It's a Filthy Goddamn Horror Show, a trivia variety show for and by American Horror Story fans, where we take a sidewinding journey through topics inspired by episodes of American Horror Story. This is my best friend, the little light in my eyes, my sweet boy, Nathan Skethway.
And this is my angel, my guardian angel, Monique Quistorf. So each week, Monique and I are rewatching an episode of American Horror Story Murder House, and as we're watching the episode, each of us picks a topic that we go away and we research, and then we come back and we teach each other, and also you find people about. And along with that, we also pick a movie to watch and to tell each other about.
This week, we are doing both of the Halloween episodes of Season 1, Halloween Part 1 and Halloween Part 2.
But it's like a little plug to this season of American Horror Story double feature. We got our own little double feature this week. So you get a little 2-for-1 this time. Same amount of content, we're just covering twice as much episode.
I mean, technically, it is just an extra long episode. It could have been.
So rewatching these two episodes inspired me to pay a revisit this time to John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978. I've seen it many times. It is my favorite of the classic 70s and 80s era slasher films. And I chose it because as we were watching the episode this week, I just sort of had an acute awareness of how in this particular depiction of Halloween night and trick-or-treating, and also most horror depictions of it, it seems shockingly easy for a whole bunch of hijinks to go down, because the entire concept of just like Halloween night and trick-or-treat is basically chaos in a neighborhood. Like there's no parental supervision most of the time, especially in movies. Like the kids are just running amok all over the place, and usually a number of terrible things are able to happen unchecked because people aren't on the lookout for things that they would normally be on the lookout for. So that's why I decided to pay a revisit to Halloween.
Nathan, have your Halloweens ever been like that? Where you felt free to engage in random hijinks?
Since moving to New York, I've definitely had those Halloweens. As a child, no. No, as a child, I was always accompanied by a parent, strictly. Have you seen Halloween, Monique?
I don't think so.
You don't know?
Because, I mean, I feel like there's so much of just pop culture, like general baseline pop culture, that just kind of seeps into your brain. Like, I've never seen Star Wars, but I think I can tell you what it's about, you know, just because and I feel like Halloween in the horror realm is one of those movies where it's like, you kind of don't have to watch it to, I mean, I obviously don't know, like, the fine details. I don't know the subtleties, but I get the gist of it, and I've seen so much of it that my brain is like, you could have watched it. But
that's a really good point, because I feel like I have a lot of movies that I feel that way about, that I haven't seen them, but I've seen so many clips from them and, you know, read synopses for them, and just generally I know about them because they're so mainstream and so in the popular culture that I don't feel like I need to see them, or I sort of feel like I have, which I would argue is how I felt about Amityville before I watched it a few episodes ago. And I've actually been doing that a couple times lately, is watching horror movies that I've always wanted to watch and feel like I should have seen but have just avoided for some reason. And without fail, every single time, I'm so surprised by how much I like them and how different they are than what I imagined. And seeing them for the first time after like, not necessarily building it up, but just having an idea of it in your head for so many years, I don't know, it's just a really cool experience. I guess my question is, do you find Michael Myers scary? Do you think out of all of the classic slasher icons, how do you feel about Michael Myers? How does he rank to you, just based on what you know of his image and his persona and just his vibe?
So, like, Mike Myers kind of has like the melty face, am I right?
No, that's Freddy Krueger. Mike Myers wears the white mask.
Okay, and Jason wears the hockey mask.
Yeah.
But, like, the white mask on Mike Myers looks... Because I'm not saying, like... Yeah, Freddy Krueger looks like he's a burn victim, which I think he is, isn't he? But it, like, kind of looks droopy. Like, it looks
Okay, so the original mask in this 1978, the original Halloween, is a William Shatner mask. Spray painted white.
What? How did William Shatner feel about that? Like,
I don't know. I would love to know, though.
Do you think they had to get his permission?
I feel like nah. I feel like Hollywood productions pull some shit like that all the time.
I had no idea that Mike Myers was wearing a spray-painted William Shatner mask.
He sure is, and that has become the face of horror throughout the years, so I would love to know what William Shatner thinks of that. The reason I ask if you find Michael Myers scary is because I have been met with debate about this when I say that I find him the scariest of the classic slashers. A lot of people like to cite the fact that he's super slow or that he's just kind of boring. Whereas, you know, Jason is, I guess for a lack of a better word, just brutal. Like that's Jason's thing, is just like crazy kills and weird ways to do it. And then Freddy is like sick, dark humor. But I personally find Michael's silence and the fact that he just fucking walks everywhere, like that stoicness to me is so much scarier than what any of the other slasher characters have to offer, because that complete blankness and lack of apparent motive, and he's just like an empty space where a person should be, basically. But he's like it. I don't know how else to describe it, but that for some reason that terrifies me to no end.
Well, and there's something, like, as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking about, like, what the other two have that, like, you know, with Jason, you know, with these, like, fantastic, gory kills, like, that's, if we look, there's a reason, you know, he's getting something out of that, right? Or even, like, Freddy Krueger's, like you said, dark humor, kind of, like, he toys with them a little bit more, right? There's, I mean, it's a dark appeal, but there's human appeal there. Like, you can maybe see their humanity. But with Mike Myers, it's so much scarier to imagine that you're dealing with something that you can't even begin to relate to, and vice versa. Like, you're not the same kind of human being or the same species. I mean, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it ends up being, I haven't seen the entirety of the Halloween franchise, but it does end up being a thing that there's something vaguely supernatural going on that makes him the way that he is. But so it's not just that, like, he's meant to be an insane character or anything like that, but he's not even so much a predator, because even a predator has something that they're trying to get out of it. Like you were saying, Jason, he's out for vengeance, and Freddy's also out for vengeance. They're both motivated by that, but Michael is more motivated by this just like otherworldly urge to kill, and that makes him, he almost is just kind of like a machine. Like he's like a robot that just constantly keeps coming. And that's also why I find the fact that he's slow so terrifying, because the bitch always gets where he's going. Like, he still finds them every single time. So, like, what's not to be afraid of? Like, yes, he may take a minute, but it doesn't matter what you do, he's still coming. So, like, I don't know, ever since I was little and was forced to watch portions of the first movie with my best friend in second grade, when I absolutely did not tolerate horror movies in any form, I have always found Michael Myers to be the scariest. I did have a couple critiques. This, I don't even know how many times it's been, 5th, 6th time around of seeing the movie. I just want to bring it back to what you said in an earlier episode about the perpetual fumbling in classic horror movies. This is one of the top examples to me. There's a moment where Laurie Strode, played by the wonderful and iconic Jamie Lee Curtis, has her back, or no, she's trying to get out of a door to get out of the back of the house, and she's just like fumbling with the doorknob and keeps looking back and screaming. It's a glass door. There's glass all over the door that if she just took 2 seconds, she could break the glass and get herself out. But instead, she takes like a full 30 seconds of fumbling and screaming to just ham up. And there are a couple moments in this movie that test my patience with that. Just also generally terrible decision making across the board from every single character. This was a particularly good example of just like the idea that all chaos can break loose on Halloween because of the fact that everyone is expecting chaos and the parents aren't watching out, which we absolutely see in this 2-part episode of American Horror Story. Sampling of things that happens. Violet gets menaced at the front door by a middle-aged man that nobody questions, is just pounding on the door and screaming about money and whispering creepy things about the daughter. Adelaide gets hit by a car. It's not been a good Halloween night for this particular neighborhood. And I started to look into a little bit of why that is, like why Halloween is looked at as sort of just like not only a source of horror from a supernatural point of view, but also just like shit goes crazy on Halloween. People run amok.
It feels like a soft purge, like TPing or egging, you know? Like that, those are the kinds of pranks people pull, like real pranks on Halloween.
That's true, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, a soft purge. That's funny. But that led me briefly down the rabbit hole of just things that have gone wrong during trick-or-treating, which then led me to the urban myth of the razor blade in the apple or the poison candy or anything like that. And in doing so, I stumbled upon a very creepy real-life Halloween horror story that I am going to tell to you now.
I'm excited.
This is a story about a man who became known as the Candyman. It takes place on Halloween in 1974. And it mostly features around a little boy whose name was Timothy O'Brien. Timothy was 8 years old. He was from Deer Park, Texas. He lived there with his sister Elizabeth, who was 5 years old, his mother Daynene, and his father Richard, who was an optician and a deacon at the local Southern Baptist Church. So on October 31st, 1974, 8-year-old Timothy goes trick-or-treating with his sister. He's wearing a Planet of the Apes costume, and they're taken by their father, and also the neighbor family went along with them. So it was like a family that they knew from church. They were friends with the kids. So they all went trick-or-treating together. And in the course of their walk, they visit a house where they go up and the kids knock on the door and nobody answers. Kids get bored. They're like, screw this, we're going to the next house. But Timothy's dad says, I'll wait behind. So the kids run. A couple minutes later, Timothy's dad shows up with a handful of pixie sticks, and he's like, good news, owner of the house opened the door, he gave me these, you guys want them? They're like the 21-inch long pixie sticks. The kids are all like, yeah, of course. So Timothy gets one, his sister gets one, and the 2 neighbor kids each get one, which there's one left, which Timothy's dad just gives out at random whenever they get home from trick-or-treating. A couple kids come to the door, he recognizes one of them from church. He's like, hey, do you want this pixie stick? And he takes it.
I'm so nervous.
You maybe should be.
Ugh.
So then that night, before bed, Timothy asks if he can eat some of the candy that he got that night when he was trick-or-treating.
What better to have before bed than a pixie stick, Timothy?
Exactly. So Timothy opens up the pixie stick and he has a little bit of trouble getting the powder out. So his dad helps him with it. He eats the candy and he complains that it tastes bitter. So his dad gives him some Kool-Aid, help him out with the taste. But pretty much immediately, Timothy starts to say that his stomach hurts. And then he runs to the bathroom and starts throwing up and convulsing. Richard, Timothy's father, would later say that he held Timothy while he was convulsing and that he felt him go limp. And eventually, Timothy dies on the way to the hospital less than an hour after eating the pixie stick. So naturally, this causes a panic in the neighborhood. Parents start turning in the candy that their kids have collected that night, just being like, in case, just test all of it. We don't know if any of it is poison, but just in case, test all of it. And there's just the general fear that a stranger in the neighborhood is passing out poison candy. Timothy's autopsy report comes back, and it shows that he has been poisoned with a lethal dose of potassium cyanide, large enough to kill 2 adults.
Oh my goodness.
After that, the police begin to search actively for the pixie sticks. 4 of the 5 were turned in to the authorities by parents. But then the 5th one, the parents who remember their child having the pixie stick, they're searching through the candy and they can't find it. So in a panic, they run upstairs to their kid's bedroom, where the little boy is asleep in bed holding the unopened pixie stick, which he gave up trying to open because it was stapled shut at the top and he couldn't get it. So he almost ate it, but then didn't. So in the course of trying to figure out where these pixie sticks came from, they talk to Timothy's father, Richard, and he retells the story. Initially, he can't quite remember what house it is, but eventually he does remember, and he takes the police there. And he talks about that after the kids left, he remembers that the owner opened up the door, didn't have any lights on in the house, but just cracked the door and reached out with the pixie sticks. Said that he had a hairy arm.
Dad,
exactly, right? Like,
dad?
what? What kind of dad?
I mean, these are real people. I don't want to, like, throw shade, but, like, we teach people, don't answer the door. Don't leave your door unlocked. And if you knock on a door and a hairy arm sticks out giving you candy, don't do that.
So the police look into it. They find out that the house is owned by a man named Courtney Melvin. Courtney Melvin is an air traffic controller. And when they question him, he claims he wasn't home at the time, that he didn't get home until 11 p.m. that night. And not only does he claim that, but almost 200 people where he works back him up. So he has an alibi almost 200 people strong. So he was definitively not at the house.
So someone else was in his house, and that's still creepy.
That is when police discover that Richard, Timothy's father, is almost 100 grand in debt, which comes out to about $520,000 nowadays.
Oh no.
They find out that he's had massive job difficulties. In the 10 years prior to this incident, he had 21 jobs. 21 jobs in 10 years. He's also suspected of theft at Texas State Optical, where he currently works, and so his employment status is shaky, to say the least. His car is in the process of being repossessed. He's defaulted on some bank loans, and the family home has been foreclosed on. The police start to take a closer look at Richard, and they find out that in the months prior, Richard was taking out life insurance policies on his kids. In the January before this happened, he took out $10,000 on both his son and his daughter. In the September prior to this, he took out another $20,000 on each kid. And then in the days before, he took out another $20,000 on each kid. The morning of Halloween, 1974, when Timothy died, Richard called the insurance company to ask about the process of withdrawing the life insurance money in the event that one of the kids should die. Soon after, police find out that same month, Richard had visited a chemical supply store and tried to buy cyanide, but left because he wasn't able to purchase anything that was under 5 pounds. They had to buy, like, I guess not in bulk, but like bulk in terms of chemical.
Costco-sized cyanide.
Exactly. They also find out during all of this that months before he had asked a friend who worked with chemicals how much cyanide it would take to kill somebody. So that is when they arrest Richard, which takes place on November 5th, 1974. So it wasn't long. A couple of days.
Thank God. I mean, was it just Timothy's pixie stick, or did he fuck with the other ones too?
He's indicted on 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder because he poisoned all 5 pixie sticks. All 5 pixie sticks have been reopened to make it look like it was random.
So he was willing to kill 5 kids.
Yes. He opened 5 pixie sticks, replaced the top 2 inches of sugar with straight up potassium cyanide powder, and then stapled them closed again to look like they were closed, and then gave one to his son, gave one to his daughter too, so he had intended his daughter to also die so he could collect her life insurance, and then also gave the rest out to random kids in the hope that it would look like a random neighborhood spree. After the fact, he claims that Timothy chose the pixie stick on his own, but Timothy's mother later claimed that Richard basically forced Timothy to take the pixie stick. He was like, this is what you can have tonight.
That hurts my heart so much. Bad dad. I take back what I said before. Bad dad.
Exactly. You were talking about not wanting to shade him, and I didn't want to give it away, but please, shade away. He goes to jail. The press dubs him the Candyman. And during his trial, his defense was the decades old, I guess it had been around for decades, the old urban myth of poison candy or like razor blade in an apple or something like that. Like he was trying to use that even though the police knew that he had gone to a store and tried to buy cyanide, though they had all of this information, he was still trying to claim that it was a totally random spree. And even after he was found guilty on July 3rd of the following year, he was found guilty on all counts. So 1 count of capital murder, 4 counts of attempted murder, and sentenced to death. He still tried to maintain his innocence for 10 years after that fact, because it took them about 10 years with the amount of appeals and everything. I think at one point they tried to appeal it based on the fact that lethal injection was a cruel and unusual punishment, which, I mean, fair enough. But eventually he was executed on March 31st, 1984. So just shy of 10 years after killing his son. And
wow.
As he was being executed, there were protesters and demonstrators outside, and they were yelling, "Trick or treat."
That's crazy. That's crazy. I feel like I definitely heard about, razor blades or safety pins, like pieces of glass, but I heard this from my parents, like my mom and my uncle who grew up in the 70s. So as soon as you started 1974, I was like, oh, really? But you know what? I've never heard the plot twist of, it wasn't a random, psychotic stranger. It was their dad.
Yeah. It's actually interesting. To this day, there haven't been any recorded cases of just a random stranger passing out poisoned candy or razor blades and apples or anything like that. That hasn't actually happened. There have been instances like this or single instances that are kind of similar, but it's truly just an urban legend at its core. But it got to the point that he was trying to use it as a defense, which is interesting because he's probably about as close as it ever came to actually happening.
Moral of the story is, don't trust your dad.
On that note, I think it's time for us to go to a commercial break. So stick with us. We have a brief message coming your way, and then we'll be back.
Here at It's a Filthy Goddamn Horror Show, we are choosing not to use advertisements or sponsorships to make money, but instead are shouting out charities that you can check out and support if you are able. And this week, I would like to talk about Free From. Free From is an organization that envisions a world where all survivors of intimate partner violence are able to build the wealth and financial security necessary to support their individual, intergenerational, and community healing. Intimate partner violence is abuse or aggression that occurs in a romantic relationship. It can be physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, technological abuse, and stalking. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 10 men, 1 in 4 gay men, and 1 in 2 trans people experience intimate partner violence in the United States. And their number one obstacle to safety is financial security. Free From has already distributed $3 million to survivors of intimate partner violence through their Safety Fund, Savings Matching Program, and Social Enterprise. If you would like to support this organization, you can go to their GoFundMe, at Cash for Survivors of Gender-Based Violence, and also check out their website at www.freefrom.org to see if there's any other ways that you would like to get involved.
So what movie did you watch this week, Monique?
Thank you for asking, Nathan. I watched The Witch, directed by Robert Eggers, and came out in 2015, which is the year that the year that I graduated college, and it feels like 37 years ago.
It's a lifetime ago.
And so this was a rewatch for me as well. I've seen it before. It is, I mean, arguably, and I guess the only footing I have to stand on is because I live with one of the most snobbiest movie people I've ever met. One of the best movies, one of the best horror movies ever made.
It is one of my very favorites. One of my top favorite horror movies, and just movies in general. I love it to death. I
mean, I definitely, the first time I watched it, which was, several years ago now, I definitely kind of watched it through that eye of someone is telling me this is the best movie, and trying to, figure out why I would have... I'm not a snob. I am, maybe I've got... How do I say this? The bar is not set very high for me when it comes to cinema. But it was such a... I'm looking for a word that's rejuvenating or refreshing, but it was such an invigorating experience to watch it this time around for my own pleasure, right? But also through my own specific lens of what can I say about this with my weird niche pocket of horror information that I have. I think it's a happy ending.
I think so.
It's this young girl who's tortured by her, not intentionally, but we're all unintentionally tortured by our parents in some way. But this Puritan family who have made their choices, and now everyone is suffering, and her mother and her sister and her people think that she's a witch, but she's not. Her younger brother is looking at her titties she's just trying to live her life, and she's trying to do her best, aren't we all? And everybody dies, and then she gets to go be chill with the devil. She gets freed of her family. In the worst possible way. And I'm sure she would not want to be freed of her family, but if your family is going to die in several different horrific, gruesome ways, there's no other way to live than to do it with the devil.
I have to agree. It's kind of a Midsummer ending. It's a little bit like she's given what she needs through the worst means possible. But none of it is her fault.
No. And it's, wrong time, wrong place.
Wrong fucking religion.
Yeah. But there's so many parts of the movie. I remember maybe 30 minutes in, I was getting that feeling of, because it's a slow creep, right? And it's so unsuspecting up to the point that the baby is taken in the beginning. And then it slowly falls apart until we're looking directly at delirium. Mom is having her boobie pecked out by a raven. That was a bit much. Also, that actress is just she belongs in a horror film, and I mean that in the that is a compliment.
It's the truth. She is cursed to be playing unhinged mothers. You recognize her, right? She's in Game of Thrones.
Oh, she also was a breastfeeding mother in that show as well.
Just unfortunate breastfeeding across the board on her resume.
It's so unsettling how the story picks up, because I even caught myself at one point, it was 30 minutes in, where I was like, oh, this feels so slow, and almost immediately it was as soon as you're when is the next thing, what's gonna something happens. It's beautiful and desolate, and the music is amazing. Everything works together so well.
The composer actually created like this insane machine. I'm gonna have to send you the video to create a lot of the sounds that you hear, but none of the sounds in that score are electronically based.
Oh, wow.
Like they're all created by instruments and this wild ass machine that he makes that has like pieces of metal that he plays with a violin bow and things that he can hit to create clanging sounds, like a slapper thing that creates that sort of like stick rhythm that you hear in the background some of the time. It's incredible what he made to make that score.
This is why I'm glad. See, I bring the nonsense and you bring the actual information as to teaching people new things about horror films, and I just sit here and talk. I just use words to say nothing at all. But it is a really incredible movie, and I mean, it did come out like 6 years ago. I am sorry if that spoiled anything for anybody. I still think it's worth the watch. I think that there are still so many incredible, like, creepy, and I mean, obviously we wouldn't be calling it one of the best films or one of the best horror films if they used campy, stereotypical ways of like getting you unsettled or frightening you. It's none of that.
Yeah, you can always make me unsettled by showing me a shot of the woods and playing some tense, creepy music, because the woods are just scary. Like anything, it's a wall and then just mystery beyond that, and anything could be in there, and that's usually the implication, is that just out of sight, and maybe even not that much out of sight, but maybe it can see you. Anything could be in there, and that fucks with me. Especially when a baby has been taken.
That I was thinking, when that scene was going, I was thinking about like if that, like I'm putting myself in her shoes of like something was close enough to you to take this baby. Like that, I mean, the baby being taken in and of itself is sad and unsettling, but like your own personal safety in danger and like being so, because it's like gone. So I am talking about a baby kidnapping this week. And I'm specifically talking about the baby kidnapping that inspired the story of Thaddeus Montgomery. And weirdly enough, this story is a story that I already know and have already done research on, because it features a prominent person who lived very near to where I grew up. Charles Lindbergh Jr. Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. was born on June 22nd, 1930. He was the child of Anne Morrow Lindbergh and Charles Lindbergh, who was famous for being the first aviator to fly nonstop from New York to Paris in 1927. Charles Lindbergh Sr., the aviator, grew up 30 minutes from where I grew up. Obviously during different times.
Same time.
Yeah. I'm so old. Just kidding. I'm fast approaching 30, but he grew up, he split his time between Little Falls, Minnesota and Washington, D.C. His dad was a senator. I mean, the whole town in Little Falls is like their school mascot is the Flyers. His childhood home is still preserved. I took a tour there like 2 years ago. They have a whole museum dedicated to him. But his son was abducted from his crib on the upper floor of the Lindberghs' home in Hopewell, New Jersey on March 1st, 1932. A ransom note was left behind. It had bad grammar. It was poorly written. I mean, there was some misspelled words. Obviously, like one of the words was gut, which is good in German, so it was suspected that it was not an English-speaking person or a native English-speaking person who left the note. But they requested a ransom for $50,000, and I thought it was interesting too that this ransom note had a signature on it. It was basically like stamped or branded with an image that was two interconnected blue circles surrounding a red circle with a hole punched through the red circle and two more holes to the left and the right. So on this paper, there's like this whole elaborate design.
Wow.
I mean, what's sad is like
the Zodiac signature was weird.
Right. I mean, what's sad is like the design was never explained. I mean, but I still thought that was very interesting that like this is Charles Lindbergh Jr. was taken 5 years after Charles Lindbergh Sr. flew from New York to Paris. So Charles Sr. was a little bit too involved. He had a little bit too much influence in the search for his son. I mean, rightfully so. And obviously, if there aren't police officers telling you not to do it, he had such the police officers respected him so much and valued his input that they didn't care. But it didn't. I mean, it definitely, I think, complicated things a little bit more than maybe they needed to be complicated. But this was like a high. This went up to the tippity top. Like, the president found out about it. The FBI was authorized to investigate the case, while the U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Customs Service, and the U.S. Immigration Service and the Washington, D.C. police were told their services might be required.
Jesus.
But, okay, so Charles Sr. believed that the kidnapping was perpetrated by organized crime figures, and the letter was written by someone who spoke German. And I already said Gut which means good. But and I'm just going to throw like weird, interesting facts in here that maybe don't necessarily pertain to the story itself, but I think are so just like delectably interesting. Several organized crime figures, Al Capone, Willie Moretti, Joe Adonis, Abner Zwillman, spoke from prison offering help to return the baby in exchange for money or legal offers. Al Capone was like, hey, if you gotta let me out, though. Like, I'll get in here, but you gotta let me. And they were like, actually, Al Capone, we're not gonna let you out. So there were obviously rewards being put out of, if you have any information or if you can find the baby, totaling at the end point at $75,000, which if we do the proper inflation, at least in 2019, was $1,172,000, was $75,000.
God.
So the $50,000 that they're asking for in ransom is just a little shy of a cold mill. 1932, we were 3 years into the Great Depression. So, like, people don't have money during this time.
Yeah.
There was a lot of discourse back and forth between the kidnappers and, well, obviously they sent letters to the Lindberghs, but somehow this man named John Condon got involved. He became the intermediary between the Lindberghs and the kidnappers. He was a well-known Bronx personality and a retired school teacher. I think that he and Lindbergh had, again, a close relationship, and he just kind of became the middleman between, so he received some ransom notes too. Condon even met with the representative from the group of kidnappers. He calls himself John. So they met in like I think they met by a cemetery in like a shadowy place where Condon couldn't quite see the man, but said that the man sounded foreign and he was unable to get a good look at his face. So all he could say was he sounded foreign. But in this conversation, John Condon shed some doubt that he didn't believe that these people had the baby. So a couple days later, on March 16th, they receive the child's sleeping suit as proof that they have the baby. On April 2nd, so remember, this poor child was kidnapped March 1st. On April 2nd, Condon delivered the ransom to John. The ransom was requested. Condon brought it. But they did a couple different things to make it very easy. Well, they thought that they were making it very easy for this whole ransom situation to be tracked. So it was packaged in a wooden box that was custom made. The ransom money included gold certificates, they were about to be taken out of rotation. So if anybody used them, it'd be very easy to find. And all of the serial numbers of the bills were recorded. So if anybody spent the bills anywhere, that they could find them and they could get information on who spent them. So that was April 2nd. On May 12th, a delivery truck driver named Orville Wilson and his assistant, William Allen, pulled to the side of the road about 4.5 miles south of the Lindbergh home. When Allen went into the trees to use the bathroom, he discovered the body of a toddler. They identified the baby by the way his toes overlapped on one of his feet, and he was wearing something that the nanny basically made for him. So they knew that was Charles Lindbergh Jr. His skull was badly fractured, and the body was very decomposed. It had already been scavenged, sadly. And it was, they tried to bury it, but it was just a couple inches underneath the ground. It appeared that the child had been killed by a blow to the head. I couldn't find anything about, like, when the baby had died. In the 1930s, I don't know if technology was advanced enough that they could figure out the exact day and time like they can now of when someone died. So officials began to suspect the crime had been perpetrated by someone that the Lindberghs knew. Violet Sharp, who was the household servant at the Morrow home, which is the mother's last name, had given contradictory information about her whereabouts. And she appeared nervous and suspicious when she was questioned. She committed suicide on June 10th, 1932 by ingesting a silver polish that contained cyanide before being questioned for the 4th time, and her alibi was later confirmed, and the police were criticized for the heavy-handedness. So this woman killed herself because she was being pressured so much by the police.
Oh my God.
So I kind of alluded to this earlier, but tracking the ransom payments it wasn't the money shot that they were hoping for. A few of the bills appeared in scouted locations, Chicago, Minneapolis, but the people spending the bills were never found. A man brought about $3,000 to a Manhattan bank to exchange, and it was later realized that the bills were from the ransom. He had given his name as J.J. Faulkner and given his address, but no one named Faulkner had lived at that address, and a Jane Faulkner had lived there 20 years ago, but denied involvement. In September of 1934, so 2 years after the kidnapping occurred, a Manhattan bank teller noticed a gold certificate from the ransom. There was a license plate number written on the gold certificate because the person who had spent the gold certificate at a gas station looked suspicious enough that the teller wrote down the license plate. And so it was tracked to a sedan owned by a man named Richard Hauptmann, an immigrant with a criminal record in Germany. When Hauptmann was arrested, he was carrying a single $20 gold certificate and over $14,000 of the ransom money in his garage. So he claimed that the money and the items were left behind by his business partner, Isidore Fish, who had died on March 29th, 1934, after returning to Germany. And Hauptmann consistently denied any connection to the crime or knowledge that the money in his house had been from the ransom. But they found a lot of evidence against Hauptmann in his home. So there was a notebook that contained a sketch of the ladder that was used to climb up to the Lindbergh window to kidnap Charles Jr.
Why? Who needs a sketch of a ladder?
John Condon's telephone number along with his address, so like the intermediary between the kidnappers and the Lindberghs, and a section of wood was discovered in the attic of the home that was examined by an expert and determined to be the exact match to the wood used in the ladder that was left behind at the Lindbergh home. So he was indicted on September 24th, 1934, for extorting $50,000 from Charles Lindbergh, and 2 weeks later he was indicted in New Jersey for the murder of Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr. So, he was identified, and the reason I'm providing so much evidence is because Hauptmann, to the day that he died, denied, he never confessed, and even his wife, to the day that she died, tried to prove his innocence. So he was identified as the man whom the ransom money was delivered, because when John Condon delivered the ransom money, he delivered it to like this cab driver. It wasn't to the people. It was like they designated a cab driver who would come and get the money and bring it to the kidnappers. So he was identified by this man as the person who received the ransom money. Several people identified him as the person who spent the Lindbergh gold certificates. He'd been in the area of the estate on the day of the kidnapping. He'd been absent from work on the day of the ransom payment and quit his job 2 days later. That isn't suspicious enough. And he never sought another job afterward, but continued to live comfortably, if you can imagine. So he was convicted and immediately sentenced to death. He made 2 appeals to overturn his sentencing, and both were denied. The governor of New Jersey in 1936 did say, like, whether or not Hauptmann is guilty or innocent, this was not a one-man job. The other people are still out there. And he directed the authorities to continue a thorough and impartial investigation in an effort to bring all parties involved to justice. this is another just interesting fact, Hauptmann turned down a large offer from a Hearst newspaper for a confession and refused a last-minute offer to commute his sentence from the death penalty to life without parole in exchange for a confession. He was electrocuted on April 3rd, 1936. He did not take the offer. He did not confess. So this is when Charles Sr.'s involvement in the investigation of the case gets questioned. Some people felt like the investigation was not run with fairness. So there was some speculation for witness tampering and planted evidence. So twice in the 1980s, Anna Hauptmann, which was Richard Hauptmann's wife, sued the state of New Jersey for the unjust execution of her husband. The suits were dismissed, and she continued fighting to clear his name until her death in 1994. So some of the theories, another thing I didn't include, but I remember, is there was this person, Isidore Fish, that he claimed left the money, but there was no medical record of him contracting tuberculosis in Germany, and no trace of him. So that's kind of suspicious. I was really hesitant to, it's very interesting, it's very juicy, but I was hesitant to talk about it because it's just speculations. But there are some people who believe that Charles Sr. had something to do with it. Whether it was a prank gone wrong, that he was trying to prank his wife, that the baby had been kidnapped, but on his way down the ladder, the baby actually fell and crushed his skull. Or that the baby was disfigured in some way, which that's the part where I'm that there's no record of that, but
would there be, especially at the time? A rich family wouldn't necessarily have any trouble keeping that a secret.
Right.
There are cases of children into adulthood being kept a secret because a family hid them away.
Well, but that speculation has it more that they faked the death and sent the kid to Germany to live a more hospitable life. So I don't know. There isn't a lot more to be said about who else could have done it, right? There are still people who think that Richard Hauptmann had something to do with it, obviously, but whether or not he deserved to be sentenced to death, there's a lot of evidence against him, but it's just so curious at the very end of it all that he could have avoided the death sentence by confessing if he had done it, and he decided not to. And who was he protecting? Because there were other people involved that never saw the consequences. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the birth of the Infantata. So this is the character that Thaddeus turns into when the chopped up parts of him are sent to the Montgomery family after an enraged boyfriend finds out that Dr. Montgomery performed an abortion on his wife or girlfriend. And in, Dr. Montgomery's, just a famed Dr. Frankenstein kind of way, put this baby together and created this not dead, not alive, bloodthirsty creature. Did you know that that character is never referred to as the Infantata in dialogue in the show?
I think I may have known that. I don't think they ever refer to him as anything other than Thaddeus. He's just called the Infantata in the American Horror Story universe, but not in the show.
Well, in the credits and the members of the series production during interviews. So when they're talking about the character, they called it the Infantata, but none of the characters in the story call him that. So I guess, we've all watched the show, and I just kind of gave you a little bit of background. But one piece of information I left out about this Frankenstein experience is that Dr. Montgomery told Nora that he used the beating heart of one of our girls to bring Thaddeus back to life. It's assumed that he took the heart from an almost fully developed fetus and implanted it into their dead son. He has some superhuman powers, enhanced strength. He lives longer. It's kind of like the child vampire situation of like you've created a reckless, impulsive monster. So Ryan Murphy has said that this character is not a ghost. He's a still living creature who sustains himself on possums and bugs until, unfortunate soul comes down in the basement that he can feast upon. I thought this was interesting too, and I'm getting this from American Horror Story, fans and their theories, but there's a theory that Elizabeth from Hotel, who is James Patrick March's wife, Lady Gaga, she does visit Dr. Montgomery, right? She gets an abortion from him. But it is suspected that it's March who dismembers Thaddeus and creates the infantata in the house, that he's the angry boyfriend husband.
Oh my God, I never even thought about that.
Well, and you might not have thought about it because their baby isn't aborted, right? Bartholomew is born, but the fact like March even becoming aware that his bloodline could have been that his child could have been killed enrages him so much that he slaughters someone else's baby with intention.
I mean, I believe it.
That's just one theory. But there's also another theory that Dr. Montgomery is related to Madison Montgomery from Coven, right? Or is it from Apocalypse?
Both.
Which would mean that he's a warlock. Which would explain how he's able to bring the infantata to life.
Well, see, it's interesting because Billie Dean Howard, played by Sarah Paulson, the psychic that we see in this season, and then she comes back a couple times. We see her in Hotel, and then we later see her in Apocalypse. She has a line whenever she meets Madison where she remarks on her last name, and Madison's like, oh yeah, maybe you've seen my movies, and Billie Dean says, I've met a lot of Montgomerys in my day, but never a witch. Which is she's giving her like a look. So I think that there is a strong implication, and I've gotten that impression before, that there is a connection there, and that Madison is somehow related to the history of the house, because otherwise the using the name Montgomery after it becomes essentially iconic in the first season, and then just using it again by chance, that doesn't feel
casually,
right
yeah.
for this series, especially now that we know that all the seasons are connected.
Yeah, definitely. Dr. Montgomery being a warlock and reanimating his child would also explain its unquenchable thirst for blood. So when Ryan Murphy talked about the design of the infantata, he stated that the mouth is based on a leech. The character's overall look is inspired by the genetic disease progeria, and the character's clothing is inspired by one worn by the Lindbergh baby.
Damn. Wow. It has been a dark episode for babies and children. This one's not for the kids.
No, that's kind of what we thought it was going to be too, but that's what you get on Halloween. So, Nathan, do you have a twist ending for me?
I sure do. Let's take a twist ending. I am going to talk a little bit today about things that did not make it into the show, such as deleted scenes and just deleted plot lines in general. Interestingly, if you watch during the opening credits, there's a couple shots actually of bloody garden shears. You see them laying on a chair at one point, and then you see somebody kind of back in the shadows snip with them all of a sudden right before a cut. And that is a reference to a plot line that was meant to be included in the show, having something to do with a murderous gardener, which was cut, but was still a part of the scripts at the time that they were creating the opening credits. So it was still so defined and so planned to be a part of the show that they got the entire way through production of the opening credits and then just kept it, because at that point they would have had to fill the space. What were they going to do? But there's no clear record of what that storyline was supposed to be. So somewhere in the lore of the murder house, back in the dark corners of Ryan Murphy's mind, there is a murderous gardener with a pair of bloody shears menacing people. Another one is the mystery of Constance's fourth child. On a rewatch, like many viewers, I clocked the fact that Constance makes a reference to having 4 children, but we only ever meet 3 of them. We only ever meet Tate, Adelaide, and Beauregard, who lives in the attic. So at the time, there was actually a character who was advertised to be in the show, played by Stephen Thompson, who was a model with albinism. And he was this albino character who was rumored to be Constance's 4th child. His scenes were filmed. You can find screen caps of some scene that he filmed with Evan Peters. Looks like it's taking place in a nursery. And there were even some very early promo photos of the cast, like all gathered together, that included him in costume and everything. He was wearing like a fur coat, but all of his scenes were cut after a few episodes were pre-screened for press. So presumably they got negative feedback on his plot lines, and they ended up completely cutting all of his scenes from the show. But they had fully filmed all of them, and he was fully meant to be a part of the show, and then they ended up cutting him. But it's interesting because that sort of gets retconned in Apocalypse when we meet what ended up being in canon Constance's 4th child, which is the little girl without any eyes. I can't remember what her name is, but we see her just briefly. Constance references all her children are there, and then this little girl is like, "Mommy, it's time for tea," and she's missing her eyes for some god-awful reason. What I want to know is if the character was meant to be dead or not, because he's fully grown in the shots that you see of him. He's not like a little boy or a teenager or anything. He's like a full-grown, at least in his 20s, man. And I want to know, did he die at some point in the house? Or is this character meant to still be alive and out there somewhere?
I have a hard time imagining what is, because we know what Asylum is like, where it just feels like there's no cutting whatsoever. Like, what kind of storyline could have possibly been cut from American Horror Story? Was it so like, that it was like there's nothing really happened, there's no fire with this one? Or was it so gruesome, like, that it was just like, this is too much?
That's what I'm curious about. But the third scene that I want to talk about is the one that they shot and that you can actually still see to this day. You can access this if you, like me, are somewhat old-fashioned and are still holding on to your DVDs. I happen to have the first season of American Horror Story on DVD, and one of the featurettes is like a full behind-the-scenes production feature, and they talk about this shot that they did, which was an homage to The Shining, the classic scene in The Shining where the elevator doors open up and all blood pours out. Only in this particular one, from what I can tell, they don't really describe what the context of it is, but it looks like a set, like a double set of stairs in a high school. So my theory is that this was meant to be a part of Tate's visions when he's having his flashbacks about having committed the school shooting. I think they had intended this to sort of be like a mood moment for Tate. But they went through the full process of building a set of stairs that were coated in green screen and backed with green screen. They made a big rig that dumped what I assume was thousands of gallons of blood down both sides of the stairs, and you can see it looks incredible. And then they used, the magic of CGI and green screen to replace it with high school stairs to create this moment where all of this blood just cascades down the stairs. And it's interesting because in the featurette, it's with like the visual effects guy who created the shot, and you can tell it is just torturing him to have to talk about this scene that they put so much love and so much work into. He even talks about in the featurette a lot of time the scene or the moment that you put the most work into and that causes you the most stress or that you think is going to be the big thing is oftentimes what ends up getting cut. And in this case, that was one of those moments. I mean, that would have been visually an insane moment in the middle of this season. There's nothing else quite like that, where there's just a torrent of blood coming down the stairs like that. So I'm interested to see how it would have played, but that's eventually why they cut it, because when they watched the scene in its entirety, it just didn't play quite right, which is unfortunately a lot of times the case. So that's why things end up on the cutting room floor.
I'm going in a different direction for my twist ending.
We love variety.
As Nathan and I watch these episodes, we ask each other a lot of questions. And one question that has just been reoccurring is, what the heck is going on with Moira? How is she the only ghost in the universe who is able to project her age differently to other people? And we've speculated some things, but today I thought I'd bring the truth, or the fan-written truth. So you've seen the show. We know her backstory. She's working for the Langdons in the 1980s as a housekeeper. She does the do with Hugo Langdon, and later he wants to do it again. She says no thanks. He's drunk. He attempts to rape her. Constance comes in, thinks it's a consensual act, or doesn't, is the flagrant bitch that we know her to be, and she kills Moira, shoots her right in the eye, and then kills her husband. So her powers include shape-shifting, age-shifting, and invisibility. So she can change her appearance into another form. So her forms are her young appearance to seduce unfaithful men, and her older appearance to women and other people who see beyond physical beauty. And invisibility, she can choose who and when she wants to be seen.
I think it's true of all ghosts in the American Horror Story universe.
All of them. But she's the only one who can age shift. So those who do not sexually objectify women, often other women, Moira appears as a tall, older woman with one working eye. The other one is gray and clouded, and in a sensible uniform dress. This is fitting kind of like the crone archetype in horror. In the other form, she appears, usually to men, as an unscathed, hypersexual young woman in a short skirt and stockings. According to Moira, this is because women's intuition gives them insight on the true nature of people, whereas men only see what they desire. However, if men can resist, if they can move past their doggish ways and see her as something other than a sexual object, then she appears to them as she truly is. And it was noted, and we'll see this happens with Ben, where she he finally sees her as the old crone. I thought it was interesting too how they pointed out that her young version of herself is like the femme fatale. So there's the crone archetype, and then there's the femme fatale archetype. Another thing I thought was really interesting, Moira literally means a person's fate or destiny. It's literally the word that is used to describe the fates in Greek literature. And another interesting fact, the actress who plays the older version of Moira, Frances Conroy, actually has a discolored eye. We see that later in future seasons. She mentioned her eye problem during the casting sessions, and the writers decided to make this a plot point so that she would not have to wear contact lenses. That's why Constance shoots her in the eye.
I love that. It was she was in an accident when she was younger that caused it, and that's why even in later seasons there are times when they have her in a contact lens to lessen the effect, but most of the time you can still kind of see it. But I appreciate that most of the time, especially in this first season, that was something that they embraced for the production, which I think the show does a lot of the times. They embrace their actors' natural looks or gifts or disabilities or what have you. Well, I think that's about all the time that we have. So thank you for joining us this week. We hope that you enjoyed learning about the American horror genre and some horror history that inspired the genre. If you like what you heard this week, do us a favor and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can also find us on all the socials. We're on TikTok at Filthy GD Horror Show, Instagram at Filthy GD Horror Show, Twitter at Filthy GD Horror, and on YouTube. You can also send us an email if you have any questions or suggestions, if there are specific topics you want us to do a deep dive into, or if you want us to talk more about something, or I don't know, if you want to learn more about us. Don't know why, but that's an option too. You can email us at filthygdhorrorshow@gmail.com.
We'd also ask that you please consider donating to the charity that we featured in the commercial break this week. Our show isn't sponsored by this organization or any other organization. We just really like to shout out people who do good things.
If you have not watched the 4th episode of the new season of American Horror Story, this is the end of the podcast for for you.
Get out.
Yeah, leave. We don't want you here. Otherwise, stay tuned for our reactions to Double Feature and tune in next week where we'll be exploring episode 6 of American Horror Story, Murder House, on...
It's a filthy goddamn horse show.
American Horror Story Season 10, Double Feature, Episode 4, Blood Buffet. Reactions, Monique.
This is the episode I've been waiting for.
Mm-hmm.
I've had so many questions. Why, how, who, what, when. And I feel like we got that resolution. We got that satisfaction with this episode of going all the way back to the beginning.
I love me a flashback expository episode. Any TV show where there's a whole episode where they flash back in time and give you a whole bunch of exposition and backstory into what's been going on, and they solve pieces of the mystery that you've been waiting for. I always find that very satisfying, especially when American Horror Story does it, because it helps flesh out the stories a little bit more. I think Cult had an episode like that I really, really liked, because the first like 3 or 4 episodes of Cult, you have no idea what the fuck is going on, and then they do an episode where it flashes back and you kind of get the pieces of the mystery filled in. So it was nice to get some resolution on what the fuck has been going on in Cape Cod.
Well, and, with that, with going all the way back to the beginning, we unfortunately get to witness the first bad one? I don't know what to call them. Do they have...
And the most of the interviews and just people involved with the show talking about the show, they're called the Pale People.
The Pale People. So we get to see, I will say, I'm grateful that we didn't get any backstory on that character, because it was hard enough to watch him transition without knowing anything about him.
True.
Just knowing that he was someone who just wanted to be talented and ended up not being talented.
Exactly. But even just the one scene that we got of him before he took the pill, which was him performing in the fucking restaurant, he was so sweet. And I don't know that I would have pinged him as a good singer, but I don't necessarily think I would have pinged him as a bad one either. Just the fact that he was mediocre enough is so heartbreaking, because he seemed so genuine, and he really did not fully understand what he was signing up for, which seems to be the chemist's objective, and how she's getting these people involved is to just be like, let me give you just enough information to make it sound great, and then I'll tell you the real shit as we go.
What was their intention with literally writing this guy as the gold star human? He's vegan, he's a pacifist, he's a Buddhist. He's what everyone could strive to be, and then he ends up just stabbing a woman in a cemetery after she asks him to pray with her.
Maybe it'll in some way speak to kind of how insidious this drug and whatever's behind it really, really is, because of the fact that it doesn't discriminate based on what kind of person you are. This guy was a great dude, and now he's a bloodthirsty monster. Belle Noire was a woman who just desperately had a dream and also had a verbally abusive, cheating husband, and was not necessarily in any way, there was nothing negative about her. She was just very subdued and kind of plain, and then now she's ruthless. So I think it's in some way just kind of showing just how dark whatever's going on here really is, and how much it doesn't matter what kind of person you are.
I think about the contrast then between how this information helps me feel about the pale people and how different that is from how I feel about the talented people. Now I have empathy for the pale people. These were just, not to say I didn't have it before, but now I'm confronted with this reality and I feel for them, but I'm still disgusted by the talented people. But it's the same, it's the same.
Yeah, it's, what it reminds me of, to jump ahead to a season that we're not yet touching on, is the crazy zombie creatures in the woods in Asylum, which were so terrifying and disgusting and gross until you found out that they were just Dr. Arden's patients from the asylum that he had plucked out of the common space and been like, hey, I'm gonna test on you, and turn them into monsters. And it's American Horror Story is very good at doing that, at making you afraid of something and then showing you the humanity behind it.
It's a Filthy Goddamn Horror Show is created by Monique Quistorf and Nathan Skethway. Nathan also edits and mixes our show.
To find out about the music used in this episode, check out our website at filthygdhorrorshow.com. It's a Filthy Goddamn Horror Show is a podcast created by American Horror Story fans and is in no way affiliated with the show.